I'm going to talk a bit about National Grid's role in the electricity system, so apologies for those of you who are familiar with that. How our role and how balancing the electricity system is likely to change over the coming years, then particularly focusing on solar PV, but as we've touched on before, we don't just think about solar PV in isolation, and then look at how some of those challenges might be managed. So National Grid's role in the electricity system is that we are the transmission owner in England and Wales, where we connect up large generation and link together the distribution networks. We're also the system operator in Great Britain, and we need to ensure that electricity or generation balances with demand 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and on a second-by-second basis. Now, balancing is carried out in the main by the electricity market, with suppliers contracting for generation to match the demand of their customers on a half-hourly basis. And we at National Grid, we act as the residual balancer. We fine-tune that market balancing to take account of forecasting errors or changes in the weather condition that change the outputs or actually the demand, and then within half-hourly fluctuations. And historically, we've primarily managed these changes and helped help the supply and demand balance by using thermal fossil fuel generation. But with the decarbonisation targets and the new generation that we're seeing on the network, that's going to become, we're going to see that generation available in decreasing volumes. Now, I thought it might just help to illustrate what we need to do by using the royal wedding a couple of years ago as an example of the changes in demand that you see and how those can be so unpredictable. So really, just to give you an idea, we've got demand increasing as everyone switches their TV on, then decreases a bit as everyone stops what they're doing as the exciting things are happening. Then maybe demand increasing a bit as everyone gets a bit bored while the procession happens, and then dropping off again as people turn their TVs off. And we, in National Grid, we need to have generation available that can respond really quickly to help meet that change in demand and help keep the frequency at the level that we're required to do. So, like I say, the situation's changing. We're getting a lot more, well, as we move towards meeting the carbon reduction commitments and the renewable generation targets, we're getting new types of generation on the system. So as I say, it's not just solar PV, that's one of them. We're getting wind, we're getting other sorts of renewables that are a lot more variable, a lot less controllable, and a lot more harder to forecast and predict. I mean, just as an example of how sort of the differences that we're seeing, I know I'm aware of one distribution network operator that has 2 gigawatts of connections on its books, connection applications. Now that's equivalent to Pembroke Power Station, which was built last year. But in terms of operation and their requirements, those are quite different. So Pembroke will have requirements on its metering, on its forecasting and on its availability, whereas with that 2 gigawatts of solar PV, that's a lot less visible, it's a lot less controllable and doesn't have those aspects around it, so it makes it a lot more difficult to manage. Combined with the variable generation, we're also seeing much larger units or likely to be seeing much larger units on the system. So looking at nuclear, for example, at the moment the largest unit there I think is around 600 megawatts, but with the new power plants that are being discussed, they're going to be around the 1,800 megawatts. So we need to have generation in place that can respond should one of those units fall over, come off the system, and so that it can rise up to still meet that demand. Now we have interconnection in place today, which we've talked about a bit, so we've got 4 gigawatts. But that's also likely to increase, which has some great opportunities, particularly when we're talking about providing extra markets for our renewables, but also brings challenges in that has the potential for much greater swings in generation and demand, or supply and demand. And also they're not controllable by National Grid. Those run on a market basis, so we can't necessarily guarantee that when we've got lots of oversupply here that we're going to be able to export that, because chances are Europe, the sun's shining or the wind's blowing as well at the same time. Now there's also going to be new demand connecting as we decarbonise as well, so things here like electric vehicles and heat pumps. Now, so those could bring some challenges with them by increasing our peaks of demand, but actually they also bring opportunities as well by giving us more flexible loads that don't necessarily have to be used at those times, so help us with demand side response, which has been mentioned already and I'll come on to later on. Then also, as has been touched on before, we've got the distribution network operators becoming a lot more proactive and active in their demand. So let me go on to focus on solar PV. So here we've got, with the sort of the top of the line, that's the typical demand profile. Probably on our lowest demand days, we're talking about an August bank holiday here where we've got lots of sun shining and very little demand because people are out and about. And these the yellow, the orange and the red show the impact of increasing quantities of solar PV. So if we look at the first 10 gigawatt chunk, that really just comes in at our lowest demand level and probably starts to increase in its output as the demand starts to increase as people are getting up in the day. So that might be all right, but as system operator, we might want to start thinking about pulling back different sorts of generation just so we've got a bit of leeway there. And as you go down, you can see that as the amount of solar PV increases, you can see that it goes down and really pushes out other types of generation. Some of this, that's probably manageable in a lot of cases, but you're going to start to think about pulling off your wind probably last. You pull off your thermal generation plant first, your more flexible plant, but you'd also need to be thinking that we'll need some of that flexible generation to stay on the system, whatever, to cope with the fluctuations and help with system stability, so help with inertia that was touched on earlier. I mean, the more challenging situation is when you start to get into cutting into your nuclear base load, where pulling those sorts of plants off can take 3 days to recover, so you've then got challenges after that. And obviously, as I touched on earlier, we might be able to export that electricity, but we might not if Europe also has the similar weather conditions. But to put this into context, it is a little bit scary, but we've got, 2.5 gigawatts. This is quite a way off. We've got time really to plan and put the right tools and markets in place so that we can manage this by the time it comes around. And I thought it might just help to show some sort of real examples from Germany. These are last year, so when they had, I think it was about 20 gigawatts of solar PV and 20 gigawatts of wind. So just a few things to pick out here. I mean, one of the things that's really quite challenging is the steep increases in the rates of generation. So at these points, we will have had probably thermal generation, wind generation on the system, and these are forecasts, I should say. So it's really having that confidence that the forecasts are right and getting the generation that has been on the system to come down in the corresponding line. Another of the challenges here is that you'll see that biggest peak on the left is on a Sunday, which is of course our lowest demand day. So it's, when you've got those situations where you've got lots of wind, you've got lots of solar on your low demand day, that's when it's really challenging. The third thing to point out here is the interconnection, which are these lines along the bottom. So Germany, one of its advantages and one of the ways it helps manage its solar is it has a lot of interconnection. I'm not exactly sure how much. I think it's around the 17 gigawatts if you compare that with our sort of 4 gigawatts at the moment. So the interconnection here is really flowing in a helpful direction. So it's flowing out when there's lots of generation and flowing in when they need the help, which is great, and it's really good if it works that way. But as I said, we can't guarantee that. And then just flipping quickly onto the other end of the scale, when we look at January, this is when we'd see our peak generation, where we've got very low amounts of solar, which will actually be dropping off when the peak demand time really comes on. So all this is really saying is we need to really make sure we've got other generation in place to cover days such as this and situations such as this. But as I said, there are a number of tools, both that we've got now and that we'll have in future, that are going to help us balance. So as I said, flexible thermal plant is the way we mostly do it at the moment, and that will continue to have a role, I imagine. But as I said, the volume's likely to decrease, so we'll need to work around that. Now storage, we make use of that at the moment on a large grid scale. On a large grid scale, we've got pumped storage, and also there's the ways that sometimes get forgotten about at the moment. So we all have, lots of us have in our houses, hot water storage tanks, and there are still people with night storage heaters. So we do use thermal storage as well at the moment. But as we said, for solar, that could be one of the real gains if we can get the price right on that and the longevity, the reliability. And I know there's lots of innovation going on around storage to help really get it into the position it needs to be. Another potential area that can really help us with this is demand side response. So shifting loads to when there's a good supply of electricity away from the periods when it's a bit tighter. And as I said, we've got more opportunities coming on for that with the new loads that are coming onto the system and on a domestic scale with smart meters. And then we've also touched on interconnectors. So we have some now, and there are plans for that to sort of the amount we've got to more than double over the next few years. So again, that's a really good opportunity, and we just need to make sure that those are working in the right way for us. And as Paul said when he introduced me, we need to work together to get some solutions and make sure we can manage these challenges. And one really good way I think we can do that is the opportunity that the grid subgroup of DEC's solar PV strategy, which I'll be co-chairing with DEC. In there, I think that gives us a real opportunity to look at the challenges around solar PV and get a really shared understanding of what they are and what we need to be looking at, and then bring together and work together to actually act it up, to constructively get some solutions to manage those problems. Some will be picking up, it's going to cover the distribution networks as well as the transmission system, so I think it will be looking at some of those findings coming out of the low carbon network fund projects, getting those to a sort of workable everyday solution, and really seeing what we can do in the PV context to get some of these larger scale solutions working as well, and really making sure as well that we can get that forecasting as accurately as possible. And I think one of the keys will be to learning from other countries, so the report that's been talked about today will be really helpful. So in summary, balancing is going to get more challenging, but solar PV is just one aspect of that. We have got a number of tools which can help now and in the future, and we need to help those develop. But we've still got time to head off the challenges. The scenario talked about earlier is a pretty low, really low probability event, and it's some way off. But we need to work together across the industry so we're prepared for those increasing quantities, and we need to trial some different approaches through innovation and really learn from those. So that's me. Thank you.